Okay, we're on our last.
Huh?
We're on our last side of tape. So you moved in the house, and I heard once you moved into that house, you had a lot of work to do.
Yes, there was a lot of work to do. The, the cellar was in very bad condition. It had a spring in the bottom of it, and that thing had overflowed, and when we went there, there was about an inch of mud on the floor. Don't you remember? We cleaned it up, and we had quite a time with our water supply for a while. We had getting well water. Had a pump in there, but you couldn't put too much confidence in it. But we finally got the thing straightened out, and we had an old furnace there that it worked, but you couldn't rely on it too much.
Right.
But we had a lot of work in the house to do, a lot of painting and papering and
this is you were.
fixing up, and we had to tear out a partition in between the hallway and one of the rooms. We tore that out, sealed it up, sealed the wall up, or the ceiling, and made a fairly decent room out of that. And
You were commuting. You were working at the time.
I was working at the time, still at Alamein and Scott. That's where I finally settled down here at Alamein and Scott.
You
And
finally.
I used to commute back and forth. That is, take a car into the Pennsylvania Railroad and take the train into Philadelphia. And get off at 30th Street, walk across the bridge to 23rd and Market, and that's where Alamein and Scott had moved to at that time. From Clover Street, which I told you before, where we were before,
Right.
had moved and up to, I think it was in 1945, out to 23rd and Market Street,
And you were,
where I commuted.
were you working? Were you working on books in that area?
Yeah,
In that
bookkeeping. Mhm.
Nana's favorite job.
Yeah, I was bookkeeper for a good many years.
So you were out, and you were in Center Square then for what you said, 14 years.
About 14 years, I guess. Here, 48 to let's see,
62.
48 to 62. Yeah. 60. Yeah. Yeah, 48 to 62 when we moved up here.
And did you worked a little while longer when you first moved here?
Oh yes, yeah. I worked from
How'd you commute then?
how? Well, I used to. No, wait a minute. How we used to get in there?
He ran the
Oh, you
I
drove?
drove into Pottstown and then took the train.
You only worked about 3 months, didn't you?
Yeah, took the train into
I hope so.
Huh?
into
said I hope so.
Pottstown.
Yeah.
Took the train into Philadelphia,
So you really,
Reading Terminal.
so you really got out into the country once you got here.
Yeah, we were right out in the country when we got out here.
Did you miss the city?
No,
No.
no,
Never?
I was glad to get out of the city.
From working.
Yeah,
And you were glad to retire?
very much. Yeah, I enjoyed my retirement.
Are
Still
enjoying it.
am. Still am enjoying my retirement.
I asked I asked Nana these questions, a few of the same questions yesterday, but I asked her, I guess I asked you what period of your younger years did you enjoy the most? and I knew which ones they were, but which, if you can think when you were growing up and when you were your younger years, which years did you think were most pleasant to you, or when they're happier, they just felt happier to you?
Well, I don't know, Diane. That's a hard question to answer because I was glad to get out of Philadelphia.
I mean, all the way back, even thinking of when you lived in West Virginia.
I don't know. It's really not any particular part that I really enjoyed over any of the rest of it. I just enjoyed it all.
Were there any places that you when you were a kid that you didn't enjoy living in, or where this?
Well, when we lived in West Virginia, when we used to come up here almost every summer, and when we'd go back, I was wishing at that time that I wasn't living there, because more or less for a while I'd be sort of depressed with the mountains closing in on you on all four sides, and knowing what things were like up around here, where you could get out and get around.
Get to the shore and
Places like that. I was sort of wished then that I was out of West Virginia, but I really was glad to get out of the mountains for a while. Even though they were nice, but you can get so much of them.
Right, they're nice to think back on.
Yeah, they're nice to think back on, but if I were to go back there now, I wouldn't recognize anything except the mountains, because the terrain that is the houses and everything else that have been built, and roads that have been changed, and highways that have gone here and there and yonder, I just wouldn't know exactly where I was for a while, except knowing that the mountains were the same. They never change.
Right, right. What happened to Uncle Frank?
Uncle Frank finally passed away when he was 85.
Down in Philadelphia?
Down in Philadelphia, yes. We brought him up and buried him up in Tremont, the same as the rest of us.
I never knew him.
No.
He was a sweet old man.
Mm-mm.
And
Never
how
knew him.
about Emma?
Well, Emma died in 55.
She died. No,
Or 54.
she died the year you were
She
born.
died the year you were born. She
hadn't seen
She
you.
died at Fairchilds, where she had lived from the time we left down here. But we had to take her to a nursing home down at 4042 Spruce Street. We're still on the Spruce Street. And this was a nursing home down at 4042 Spruce Street, and that's where she died.
Okay,
And she was taken up to Tremont.
Absolutely. Now I know why we always went to Tremont.
Oh yeah.
I was small.
Were you ever Tremont? Were you?
For picnics.
Yeah, they're all
Well, see, I don't remember Diane ever being up there.
Huh?
I don't remember Diane.
Sure.
Oh yes, Diane was up there.
I remember going
Diane,
almost
They
every
were
year.
all up there, even little Randy. Because he,
Well, I know Randy was up there because
Yeah,
I asked Nana this question yesterday. If they're, now again looking back, if you could have done something differently or changed something, is there something that would come to your mind that you might have wished you had made a different decision, or you had done something that was different than what you did?
well, if I had been able to go to one of the academies, would have been been quite a change in my life.
Right.
That's the only thing that I know of that would have changed radically changed my life.
You wouldn't have met me.
No, I wouldn't be sitting here taping them.
No, that would
You
have
would
been,
have been here.
no, that would have been a whole change in my life.
Yeah.
So
Everybody's life here.
it was supposed
Yeah.
to happen.
That's fate.
Right. What else did
That
I
was
ask
the way it
you?
was supposed to be.
Nan and I were talking about, oh, I know, we talked about inventions yesterday.
Yeah.
All the inventions that had occurred during your earlier lifetime,
Well,
did any one of them have more of an impact on your life than others? Or was any one more wonderful and special to you than
the invention of
others?
electricity, as far as I can remember,
Made a lot of other things possible.
oh yes, much more.
And then we were also talking yesterday about how, while inventions are wonderful, we were talking about how some of the destructive things that have come about, not because of inventions, but just sort of the way things are today, with everything that everybody has. All the free time people have and all of the material things that people have that they didn't have so much when you were both growing up. And if that's really been a blessing, or if people don't know how to control those things,
Yeah.
you know, the things control them. Do you think that's a why do you think we have so many problems these days? Or do you think we just hear about the problems and that we used to have them when you were young, too?
Well, of course, our problems in those days were much different than they are today. Today we have so many things that we can cope with the problems that arise, which we didn't have in those days.
I mean, like the physical problems that
Yeah.
arise.
Mhm.
Eating and shelter and
Well,
getting around.
just living. The living cycle has changed considerably. When we were growing up,
How do you think it is now? Well, people aren't
Well-
worried about survival, you mean, as much.
people were not worried about survival in those days, as far as I can remember. That was never given much thought, except in the religious sense.
Can I say something?
Sure.
They talk about the people living old today, that it's not exactly a miracle, but that there are so many people living older today than there were.
That's right.
But in my family, look how many have lived to be old. My grandfather was 95. My Uncle Willie was way up in his 90s. Aunt Phoebe was in her 90s. What do you say about them?
Well, that depends on families. Some families do and some families don't.
Well, I know that is the case. But they talk about maybe 40 or 50 used to be the cycle.
Well,
Right.
And yet in my family they all, except those that died as children.
the lifestyle has changed.
But that most of those children died of these diseases that have been controlled now.
Yeah.
So they probably average that out.
You know, they don't
Most
have
likely,
those
they do,
today. But
yeah.
those children evidently died of those
But
diseases.
as I said
But
before,
all the rest of them that lived all except Uncle Louie and Catherine, but then there again, and Catherine, she died, as I told you,
Right.
getting pneumonia. But all those other people lived, all of them, well, and Lizzie was 65, maybe she would be the
Well,
youngest.
that was your family.
How old was Emma and Annie when they died? Your two sisters.
Emma was
Emma was
75, and Annie was about 78, I guess, wasn't
She
she?
was 2 years older than Annie.
77. She was a couple of years older than Emma.
They were in their, we're not quite sure, but they were in their 70s.
In their 70s. I think Emma was 75.
Yeah, I don't know.
But there again,
More people live live to be older now.
Yes.
yeah,
If they add all the more ages of death together, and there were a lot of people that died when they were younger in your mother's generation, that would bring the average down so that they could say most people died when they were 40 or 50. That was the average age of death because they would average all of them together. Now if they average, there's much less death of infants and children, so now when they do the average, it'll be up higher. They'll say most people live to be 70. I think that's, we just happen to have a family that
Well, that varies from time to time. Some families live longer than others. That's all.
well, they say it all depends on your genes. So,
Well,
uh,
who knows?
I don't know.
Following the taping session with my grandfather, we recalled a few events that he hadn't placed on the tape, so I'm making an addendum to this tape. One had to do with his health. I had asked him about his childhood illnesses, but the one he forgot to tell me about was his problem with his tonsils when he was a child. His tonsils exploded on him, and we didn't go into any detail about it, but this was something that happened to him when he was still a boy. Later, in 1953, he had a similar problem with his appendix. His appendix exploded, and he spent some time in the hospital. He also remembered some information about schooling. We were talking about Drexel University in Philadelphia, and he remembered that he had taken one semester in bookkeeping with his friend and neighbor Jack Burns. Later, when he was first married, and before my mother was born, he spent 3 years taking evening courses in banking. He had 1 year left to receive his certificate, but the banks closed during the Depression at that time, and he never finished the program. This tape was produced on February 24th, 1983. At the time of this taping, my grandmother and grandfather lived together on a small farm in a village by the name of Warwick Village, with a post office address of Elverson, Pennsylvania. The tape was produced by my grandfather and myself. I am his granddaughter by my mother, who is his daughter. My name is Diane Joyce Barlow. My mother is Dorothy Tipton Barlow, their daughter. I am the age of 29 at the time of this taping. The other voice that is heard on this tape, towards the end of the tape, is that of my grandmother, Ethel Robinson Tipton. Her tape was made on February 23rd, 1983, again by me. She, of course, had a few things to add to her tape also. And we had completed her tape, so I've decided to add them on to the end of my grandfather's tape. When we were talking about the Depression, she remembered how her boss, Mr. Slosher, who owned the 8 grocery stores in Norristown, reacted to this event in his life and his business. He lost over $20,000 overnight during the Depression. And my grandmother said, although he pulled himself back together, when he would come into work during those days, he was just physically sick and actually looked green from being sick.